I want to know more about Adrian Newey, the man.
I ended up with a fractured skull. Mandy rang Bernie and said, look, this is not looking good. All the other teams in the pit lane considered us as the party team that would never come to anything, and it's just a bit of a joke.
I would also like to know what it was like working with a young version of me, because I was quite shy when I was younger.
And not that quick.
No.
It's off, Jordan.
Is going to Ferrari, is that on your agenda, or could you ever see that happening? How many times have you been approached by Ferrari, and by who?
Hello and welcome to Formula for Success. I'm David Coulthard, and alongside me, well, virtually, is the one and only Eddie Jordan.
Did I come in too soon there, David?
You always are known to have come too soon, and you stay too long. There's I've heard that about you.
That's not very clever.
Well, look,
Anyway.
For a man who's not very clever, you've done incredibly well, and you've done so well. I've got to say, congratulations, EJ, because you have got a man on our show this week who's sitting alongside you, who I don't think arguably is the most successful designer in Formula One history, although someone might be able to link some other chap to lots of success. It's the one and only Adrian Newey.
Hey, how you doing, guys? Good to see you.
Well, look, it's great, Adrian, to have you on board.
No, thank you. No, I was really enjoying it. It's down in Cape Town with EJ. We're cycling buddies, and well, that's all actually really down here.
He's not allowed to say anymore.
No, exactly. But no, it's great to be down here. Good little motor racing crew down here, Jody Scheckter, etc., etc. So really fun.
Yeah, well, I'm sure EJ is down at the bottom of your list of favourite people to hang out with, but we really do appreciate on Formula for Success that you are in the same room as him for the next 45 minutes or so. So, EJ, as you're right beside Adrian, I'll let you fire off with this discussion.
Well, as you rightly introduced him, I'm trying to keep away from the activities. We have chats like this after we go cycling up Chapman's Peak. And the last time we did that, we had Mike Rutherford from Genesis. And I think when he was on our program, DC, he actually relayed to everyone there about the stories that we had in terms of Formula One stories, made everybody in rock and roll look almost timid and saintly. So I'm sure following on that basis, we're looking for stories rather than hardcore motor racing story with, statistics and what he won here and what he didn't win there. I want to know more about Adrian Newey, the man, where he went to school, how many kids he's got, what he's doing for the future. Incidentally, in about 10 days' time, he's going to be 65, and we want to know what is he planning for his retirement.
He'll never retire.
So, DC, you fire ahead first, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, well, look, Adrian, then I think that is a very valid point. A lot of people, of course, whether they're hardcore, long-term followers of Formula One, or whether they're the Netflix generation who've just tuned in recently, but they won't know your backstory. And I know a little bit about it because, I've had the privilege of working with you since way back when I was a test driver at Williams. So without sort of, unraveling any tears from your past, maybe you can just sort of explain your journey from young man with a vision towards being involved in motorsport, or was that the case? At what point did you decide motor racing is where I want to be?
That bit's easy, and I don't really know why, but from about the age of 10, then I decided I wanted to be involved in motor racing as a designer, and I used to make these little Tamiya model scale kits, and then after a while, by the time I was about 12, I was bored of making other people's designs. I started sketching and making my own models out of bits of bent aluminium and fiberglass and stuff. And that kind of really cemented the whole thing. So then, I went to school, got booted out of school, went to the local technical college, got into girls and bikes, almost lost that direction, but came back to it, and went to uni on the basis that studied aeronautical engineering on the basis that aircraft are closer to racing cars than any other kind of discipline. Wrote around to all the teams I could find addresses for when I graduated. This was 1980, so well before the internet, and generally got the catch-22 answer of don't hire people without experience. So I didn't honestly know what I was going to do when Harvey Bosselthwaite from Fittipaldi at the time rang me up, and luckily I was in, and said, "Can you come for an interview?" So rode up on my Ducati up to Reading from Southampton, sat in the little porter cabin, and Harvey came out and said, "Oh, you've always got a motorbike?" Oh, sorry, I was in my leathers. "What bike have you got?" And I said, "A Ducati 900 SS," which is actually will money from my grandmother. That my parents were really pissed off that I bought that bike. Anyway, there we go. And they said, "Oh, I've got some Moto Guzzi Le Mans, which is the big rival. Can I have a go on a Duke?" So I said, "Yes, of course, be my guest." He went off around the industrial estate disappeared for about 15 minutes, came back, and in those days, 1980, the helmets all had these huge, the full face, but they showed you a whole face. And he came back, big grin on his face, took his helmet off and said, "When can you start?" So that was my one and only interview in my career.
That's not necessarily the way that not a good recommendation to everyone nowadays. That is a long time ago, 40 odd years ago.
Yeah.
So
that sounds like the sort of way Eddie would do his, sorry, EJ, with the time zone is getting in the way of our connection here, but that sounds like the sort of way you would do a job interview, nicking someone's car or, their bike or something.
There's a slight difference. The bike actually was returned. In my case, I would probably have gone to the local shop to pawn off the car or something. No, listen, stop making me look like a criminal, David. I don't need to work very hard to make that happen. So it's all right, just tranquilo at the moment, guys. Just leave off Eddie Jordan. I mean, he's quite a decent guy, and it's Christmas. We've got to be nice to one another. We've got to find the spirit, not what's in the mug. We've got to find the spirit that's in the glass. Guys, happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Yeah.
I'm afraid the glasses are getting empty already, but there we go.
Anyway, so we talked about meeting girls. Was girls a problem for you in the beginning or not?
Christ. So I went to this very Dickensian public school called Repton, which was meant to be a big family tradition. I quite recently found out that the family tradition started at my dad, so it wasn't much of a tradition. But anyway, my brother went there, then I went there. At 13, and to be honest, I hated it. I didn't make friends easily. I had a few friends, but I also got bullied a bit. I just never enjoyed a day at that place, really, apart from when I was tinkering about. They allowed me to bring my go-kart up and tinker about on it, so which is another story in itself. So, yeah, apart from kind of going over, there's a girls' public school, which is about 10 miles away, so they used to cycle over and kind of strut around like a peacock and try and think of useful chat-up lines, which I was invariably hopeless at. But I did actually start to get on with the music teacher's daughter.
Oh, yeah.
And was then caught having a little thing with her, if you like.
Cuddle is the word.
Cuddle is the word, exactly. Okay. That got reported by the music teacher, by her dad, which then got relayed back to my school, which I was summoned for. So apart from that, at 16, I was effectively completely girl naive.
Well, obviously, DC.
But then went absolutely crazy, because then I got kicked out of school, went to the local college, at which point I'd gone from this very sort of restricted school where it was all boys to kind of complete freedom. And I have to say, and it was 1975, so punk was just starting to come in, and I just went absolutely nuts for about a year and almost failed my first year college exams.
Well, I can see your love for music. As a total punk head, I'm not sure I can find that looking at you now, but I'm sure it's there somewhere, because DC, just in case you don't know, tonight we're going to see Dave Matthews Band together, and Dave Matthews is a South African guy who's huge in the States, and I'm really looking forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my wife's South African, and she back in the day kind of worshipped Dave Matthews as the guy out of the South African guy that had made it big worldwide. So she's really looking forward to seeing that.
And of course, David, your friend and mine, John Giddings, who owns the Isle of Wight Festival, and he helped sort out the tickets for this. So I know that Adrian is a particularly close friend.
John's been great over the years. John and Caroline are very good friends. We actually, at Christian Horner's wedding, after the wedding, we stayed in the local hotel in just up the road from Milton Keynes, and Caroline introduced this kind of competition of, right, how far can you sing the lyrics of a song just on your own without any music accompanying it? And it's actually remarkably hard anyway. We had a good go at various things from American Pie or whatever. And Bohemian Rhapsody, of course. We were up until about 2 a.m. trying to do our solo karaoke, which is not very good, obviously. And the security guard every half an hour would come along and say, "Can you lot please shut up?" Because all the guests in the hotel were complaining about the racket. And of course, we kept going and eventually got evicted from the hotel. I think we're not welcome back to Woburn Abbey ever since.
DC, of the three of us here, I must say I'm the odd one out. I like to be in bed by 10:30 latest. He's only going out at that stage, and I can't imagine what you're up to at that age, that time of the night. But the reality is, every night when he comes to my place, he knows what I'm going to say, and it's not exactly the nicest remark, but it actually clears the room very quickly.
Fuck off, you lot. Get out of my house. It's time for you to all go, is basically.
So the best way to clear a house is you've got 10 minutes to drink up and eat up, and then would you all please be very grateful and fuck off. And honestly, everyone looks at each other because they're not used to that kind of terminology, because this is a very well brought up.
Well, there's 2 exceptions.
Who's that?
Me.
Oh, yeah, but he doesn't leave anyway. He goes back to his own house, opens a bottle of whiskey, and gets trashed. And the next time I'm supposed to be cycling with him, the next morning, he can't put his leg across the saddle. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but by the end of it, I'm beating your ass. So
yes, that's true. DC.
So look, Adrian, we couldn't have you on, and it's great. I love all of these away from motor racing stories, but I've got to ask just one motor racing, and then Eddie can indulge on all the sort of off track stuff. But you've had an incredible career, and this has been an incredible season. I can only imagine that this, it can't get better than this in terms of you leading a team of people, and you're always at great pains to acknowledge all of the great men and women that are part of your design studio. But do you pinch yourself and go, well, that's it. I surely can never get a clean sweep of Grand Prix victories. No one ever has. And, statistically, this is off the charts.
It's a funny one. So going into the season, then, this has been the second season into a very big regulation change. And yes, we saw a smooth clear from Ferrari in the second half of last season, but Mercedes won Brazil. It's clear they were coming forwards. We thought this year was going to be really tough. And kind of the way it panned out, never ever expected it. But the funny thing is, when you're in it, you're just in it and you're looking forward. You're not really reflecting. So I don't know, maybe when I look back at this in my dotage when I'm being wheeled around in a bath chair, I'll think, that was actually a cracking year. But at the moment, it's kind of, you're just looking forward to 20, or we're on to 24 really.
Yeah. So here's the thing then, that for anyone out there who would like to be inside the mind of sports people and people involved in sports, and EJ, you can relate to this as well. We're never satisfied. We never give ourselves 9 out of 10 out of 10. We might give ourselves 9 out of 10, but there's always a feeling that there's more that we can do.
Well, the thing is, in my case, the cards were dealt for me. I would never have been able to survive without the tobacco money, whether whoever it was, but obviously more, especially the Benson and Hedges days. And when they came and went, we as a private team, because remember, I had not one single investor, because that's not the way I wanted to run it. I wanted to do it on my own. So I realized that my game was up. I'd achieved what was the maximum I could have achieved. So I wanted to do other things, and we did a lot together on BBC, and then I went to Top Gear, and then I did other things, and I'm still doing other things and wanted to sail around the world. So I was able to cope with it, but there was the potential of being a real tricky time, because when you want to do something and you're not allowed to do it, that's where it pains and it hurts. In this case, in my case, I realized there was never a chance that I could continue on as it was. So it was a godsend, and to see what Aston Martin are doing now is brilliant for me, because, and of course Force India, because I think that they haven't quite got into the top three yet, but will they? My guess is they will when they get the Honda engine, that's for sure. But of course, it'll be too late for Alonso, so they're going to have to do a rethink about the teams. But no, I don't have any regrets about where I am. I achieved what I felt was the maximum I could achieve. So my advice to Adrian as he approaches that big Magic 65 is there's possibly a time soon that he's got to do a bit of soul searching. And where am I going from here? Can I improve on what it is? Is it not best to let someone else have a chance and sit back and enjoy it and to do other things? Because there's endless amounts of opportunities for me as a speaker, as a provider of information, as an analyst of whatever it is. But so for sure, for the rest of his entire life, he'll have as much work as he'll ever want to have. So I'm sure he has to sit down and think about this, which I'm sure he's already done.
Well, first of all, going back to your point, DC, I think that's a really interesting one, actually, is that never being satisfied. And I think, as a sportsman, because effectively as an engineer, I'm in the sports category, in as much as you get immediate feed, in competition every couple of weeks or every week now with the way the season's gone. And yes, you might think, okay, we've had this fantastic season, broken various records or whatever. The reality is that there's things with the car that we feel can be improved. So you're not really thinking about that. If focusing on things like what are the weaknesses, how can we improve that? And that actually, funny enough, is why Singapore was quite the race that we didn't win. It's quite useful for us because we made a complete and utter arse of that, if I'm honest. It exposed some weaknesses in the car, and so that's what you really think about is how can I improve that? How can I eradicate that for next year and just move forwards? And I guess for you as a driver, it must have been the same, where I don't suppose you ever look back and think, I drove the perfect race there. There's going to be something that you feel that you could have done better. That's just the nature.
Yeah, I used to keep a little notepad when I was coming up through karting and the cars, where I would give myself a grading out of 10 for my performance over the weekend. And even when I won, I never gave myself 10 out of 10. And sometimes where I'd finished maybe 4th or 5th, I'd give myself a higher grading because I felt I'd maximized the opportunity that I had on that given weekend. And it's what's continually driven me forward. And, I've not operated at the same level of success as yourself, Adrian, in terms of over, the periods of time that your chosen skills have been deployed. But I think actually it doesn't matter who we are and what we're doing. I think that works for everyone in everyday life. Any task that you're given, it's about trying to be the very best that you can be. And you can be satisfied with a job well done. But if you actually think you can't improve on it, then that's almost like giving up on life. It's like saying absolutely. That there isn't more potential. And that's the thing that drives me forward.
Yeah, absolutely. You're always searching for perfection, but almost by definition, of course, you'll never achieve it.
So I think it's a fair question because a lot of people are talking about where is Adrian in terms of relationships to Ferrari, whatever happened there, did any approaches happen? And I suppose when you talk about retirement, it is going to Ferrari, is that on your agenda or could you ever see that happening? And if not, I'd like to know is how many times have you been approached by Ferrari and by who?
Well, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, Ferrari is this magic brand that I suppose in all honesty, probably everybody in motor racing is always fascinated by and tempted to join if there's the opportunity. And I've been approached and come close 3 times now. One of those in IndyCars way back. And it's an amazing brand. It has had all this mystique about it. It's effectively the Italian national team, with all the pros and cons that come with that. And the cons are that you are kind of, if you don't do a great job, you're absolutely berated and torn apart. Of course, if you do a good job, then you're a national hero. So that brings all its own pressures. But I mean, for me, I have to try to take the passion, that side out and approach it from an engineering side. And the teams I've worked for, I've been hugely enjoyed, and of course Red Bull, which is largely in part to your advice as well, David, was that's a team I've been at more or less from the start. It's a team that I've been very centrally involved in developing the engineering side of the team. So it's a team I kind of feel comfortable with. We all know how we work. It would, I suppose, to change now. I'm not saying I would never ever change, because you should never say that. But it'd be like walking out on your family, because that's what it's become.
So, Adrian, I'm a little bit curious at two things. One, how happy you are that you never had to work with Eddie Jordan. I'm sure he tried to persuade you to join him over the years. And I would also like to know what it was like working with a young version of me, because I was quite shy when I was younger, not the sort of more mature and outgoing individual that I am today.
And not that quick.
No. So I'm not going to... All right. First question first.
Piss off, Jordan.
First question first. So I kind of knew... I didn't really know Eddie very well. I kind of obviously knew who he was, of course.
Lucky you.
Anyway, I was to say, at the local pub in Oxfordshire, when I was at Williams, and it was a pig roast or something in the Sunday lunch in the middle of the summer. And suddenly EJ appears at this flipping barbecue in the pub, and
With Ian Phillips.
With Ian Phillips, who I knew very well from my Leighton House days. He was the team principal. And Eddie, what are you doing? You like a beer? What's the crack here? And it became evident that it wasn't just a coincidence. He hadn't simply turned up that day, and he basically said, "Well, you need to join, and here's a check for 150 grand."
It was 500,000.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't 500.
Do you know what he did? He cheated on me, DC. That is true. I gave him a check.
It wasn't signed. He didn't sign it.
Well, you don't think I'm a complete idiot, do you? But I didn't know you didn't twig that then, did you? Of course, I gave him a check, all filled in, but no signature on it. Not bad for a starter for an Irishman, is it? That's the way it worked. Anyway, he took away this check. He was unknown to us. He wasn't happy with Williams, and he was negotiating with Ron. So he brought the check. He will deny this, but he brought my check to Ron Dennis to show that he had already an agreement with me, and that we'd have to buy it out. So meaning some of the money would come back to my pocket, which it never did. He chiseled on me, guys. He actually defrauded me.
Yeah, that's bullshit. Well, I think you're right. Actually, it was 500. You are right.
There you go. See. Truth always prevails, DC. You should know that.
An unsigned cheque is not of very much value.
It's not a negotiable instrument, is that?
But anyway, the problem with that, of course, is having given that cheque back to him, then it doesn't do it now, finally, for about the next 20 years, every time I saw EJ, it'd be, I fucking own you. I own you.
I do own you. Anyway, what I'd like to ask, because both of you guys, and it's a question to both of you, but I've got to just ask, because I think he was a huge part, not just to Formula One, but also in particular to Red Bull. I would like to know both of your opinions of what Didi Mateschitz brought to Formula One per se, not just the Grand Prix in Austria, but the team and success. You guys have had first-hand knowledge. I had a little bit, but please tell us about Didi.
Well, you knew him before me, David, so would you like to go first?
Well, obviously an incredibly successful gentleman in that he, was the driving force behind creating an entirely new drink sector, the energy drink sector, especially with the can shaped very differently to the sort of traditional, fizzy drinks cans. So I think that the legacy and the achievements are absolutely incredible. But what was the standout for me was how grounded and approachable he was, because I think a lot of the time, because he wasn't very much a publicly engaged figure, he didn't do a lot of interviews, and therefore was very much sort of a mystery to the masses. But when you were involved in a business with him, then access was never an issue. So in the beginning of Red Bull's journey, I remember before I'd even signed a contract, asking him the question, what do you expect of me beyond the obvious, in terms of driving the race car? And he said, I just expect you to be yourself. And there's only one rule. don't say that you don't like the drink, which was a fairly obvious thing. You weren't ever going to be with a brand and then say, oh, I don't really like this. So that was easy because I'd had invested heavily in Red Bull over the years in the many nightclubs that I'd gone to prior to signing for the teams. So I love the uncomplicated nature of his approach and the uncontrolling nature of individuals. Just do your job. Just, be straightforward. And that was the standout for me. And, for you, Adrian, I remember because I was there when you first met Dietrich. He was very straight to the point with you, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. I mean, so really the backstory there was that kind of this is through 2005. Then I was at McLaren. I was actually kind of feeling slightly stale though. We were having a very good year, but I just felt like I needed a new challenge. And Christian Horner, who was the very young team principal of this new startup party team, which was actually the joke of the pit lane in truth, was kind of kept bumping into me in the paddock going the opposite way, and then eventually kind of said, "Would you like to join?" And I thought, oh, okay. Interesting. So I rang David up and said, "Look, I've had this approach from your team. What do you think?" So we met. You booked a room at the Bluebird Club in London, and Christian, David, and myself sat and discussed it and the pros and cons. And I'll be honest, I was quite nervous of it because on the one hand, it was very attractive to join a team more or less from the start and be involved in how you shape and develop it. Kind of a bit unfinished business from my Leighton House days. But on the other hand, entrepreneur owners in Formula One typically have a very poor longevity, and of which Leighton House is a shining example, where they will come in and they will commit for 1 year, 3 years, whatever it is. Hesketh being another example, David Team, the Essex guy. All these examples where entrepreneur owners come in, lots of money, usual thing that way to make a money in Formula One is to start with a big one because it'll end up as a small one as an owner. So I didn't know if this was going to be a team that would hang around or whether it'd sort of be in for 2 or 3 years and then fold, which kind of only committing to something obviously isn't what you want. And David said, "Look, I really believe these guys are the real thing." So we then went over to Dietrich sent a plane over to collect us and take us over to Salzburg, where the headquarters are. And at Salzburg, just by the airport, there's Hangar 7, which is the big display kind of thing. And this is meant to be all top secret, hush hush. So we walked in, DC, Christian, and myself, into Hangar 7, just as this band of Japanese tourists who had come over as Formula One fans were walking past. So they were all happy, snapping and smiled for the camera, 1, 2, 3, etc. But anyway, I met Dietrich, and yeah, he had a presence and a personality. So obviously, I agreed to sign, and I think what was being absolutely remarkable and so helped contribute to our success is exactly as you just said, that he put his trust into us as the team, and just left us to it. He gave us complete autonomy. If we needed investment in some piece of equipment like the simulator or wind tunnel or whatever it might be, then he would, as long as we went over to Fushel and gave a good business case of what it would do and how much it would cost, he invariably said yes, and just let Christian and myself get on with it. And that gave us an agility that perhaps some of the other teams lacked, and really allowed us to react quickly to things as they developed.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember those meetings heading over to Salzburg between Grand Prix and downloading what had happened and what we needed. And it was, it was the building blocks of the future success. So, Adrian, the unfinished business of Leighton House has absolutely now been not finished, because you're still writing history, but you can feel that you've gone from startup to the highest point on the challenge, the World Championship. Yeah,
I mean, it's funny. It's kind of, as you said, then think you'll admit also that Red Bull it had the Red Bulletin, and it had the big energy station. It was all the other teams in the pit lane considered as the party team that would never come to anything, and it was just a bit of a joke, really. And we weren't that serious. We were happy being a mid grid team, and I think obviously they've kind of, as we started to go forwards, then there was a bit of shock and resentment, and I think particularly perhaps from the well-established teams with manufacturing backing behind them. How could this fizzy drinks company owned team actually rival the Grandies, the big names of the sport? And that 2009 season, when we had a new set of regulations, then we were able to come out with a decent little car and kind of realise our dream of winning races, and the following year going on one bigger.
Yeah, fantastic. It's a fantastic success story that shows it's not the name above the door that gives success. It's always the people within. And if you've got a small, motivated, talented group of individuals who are willing to work together as a team, because as Adrian, you'll have known from your journey, and Eddie as a team owner, you'll know that sometimes you get a brilliant talent from a design point of view, but they just don't work well with others. And it's like a little cancer that you've got to cut out. You need people to understand their roles, be empowered, and for them to do the best they can in that particular role. And that's what a team is, and that's what builds success.
No, absolutely. I mean, Formula One, at the end of the day, like any sport, it's a people. It's not the equipment. It's not the rest of it. They're important, of course, but the fundamental key is the people. And when I first started at Red Bull, which is effectively the ashes of Jaguar and therefore Ford, then there was a bit of there's a meeting culture and there's an email culture, and there was a bit of I think because Jaguar had a bit of a revolving door policy in terms of team principals and senior personnel, then there's a bit of not unionist, but kind of this lot will come in and they'll stay for a couple of years and then they'll move on to the next. So there was a bit of disenchantment within the workforce, and there were 3 or 4 actually militant people who were leading that sort of keep your head down, we'll do it the way we've always done it, and we'll just wait for the next new management. And really kind of unfortunately having to let 3 or 4 people go and showing them the door, which is never a nice thing to have to do, and bringing in some new people and then kind of trying to change the culture was what eventually they felt successful more than anything.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I think that's fantastic, Adrian, to hear that and how you've helped shape that team. And as I said earlier, you always recognise the team that are working within your group there. One thing I'm curious to know is the process of designing a racing car. There's several hundred people now involved in putting together a race car for any given season. When you started, there was probably less than 100 people that you were dealing with. Does that mean that the workload is so great that you just have to keep delegating and delegating and delegating, or is it still big picture thinking for you, and then trusting in those that are deployed to work on, suspension geometries or gearbox configurations or whatever it is that goes into the overall concept of a race car?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I've kind of been in the industry for a long time now, and so when I started in Formula One in 1988 with Leighton House, then we had a total of 5 people in the engineering office, including myself, and 50 people in total of the whole team. You kind of then through the 90s, the teams grew a bit, and then through the noughties and to today, they absolutely mushroomed. So I think now we're something like 250 engineers. So in that sense, it changes, of course, but I've always tried to, as much as possible, delegate the managerial side of the engineering, so as I can be free to first and foremost work with all my colleagues, the fellow engineers, discuss ideas with them, help to try to develop them, and then allocate time to myself where I can just stand at the drawing board, the last dinosaur, and develop my own ideas. And that it's that combination which I absolutely enjoy and gets me up every day.
Yeah. Eddie, let me ask you this question. You love your rock and roll. You brought music to Formula One, and that's obviously something that's been embraced by modern Formula One. And we know Adrian likes his festivals and music and all the rest of it. What's the biggest party the two of you have been at together? And that probably involves an excessive amount of consumption, whether it was water or alcohol or whatever it was.
Well, yeah, just leave it at the water, David. We leave the rest to you. But, I see, even if I haven't arranged to meet him, I've met him year on, year out, always at the Isle of Wight, because I've played there 4 or 5 times with the Robbers. And it is a very special place because it's underwater. I stay on the boat. I'm able to walk through the fields and come up and do the gig and then go home and have a few beers or a barbecue. It's kind of a very special place. But in terms of gigs, for me, Live Aid was perhaps certainly the one that I was most associated with. I was completely mesmerized by the feeling, what Geldof did there. And Brian Ono was spectacular, because I think I read something recently where I'm not sure if it was Bono, it was sort of a take on what Mandela had said, because Mandela said sport has the power to change the world, and Bono sort of mixed that around and said music has the power to change the world. And so that, I think music does have that power. And I think sport has the power. And we're lucky because we're able to embrace, and where we are at the moment in Cape Town. So we've got Roger Taylor from Queen, we've got Ruby Wax, we've got Mike Rutherford from Genesis. And we talked about Jody Scheckter, and Ralph Schumacher lives here now. So, I probably see more of these guys than I ever would do who's my neighbor in Monaco, which is Nico Rosberg, for example, or Hakkinen, or some of these guys. Those garages, it's just a different variety here. And I think, mind you, we are here in their summer, and everybody is talking about the outdoors. No one ever is inside. Everybody is in shorts, and everybody is either having a braai, which is a barbecue, and that it's a different culture. But at the same time, it's the respect for music is huge all the way around, and that's what I get off. I have the Robbers here. I'm playing this place where we're recording this. I have a gig here on Monday, and also on Sunday. So I'm as busy as hell at the moment, and I'm loving it. And hopefully Adrian's going to come along and help me drink my way through it.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, we go to the various live music venues here in Cape Town, or in the area, which is fabulous. I think to answer that question, though, I guess my standout actually was Maxi Jazz of Faithless, who unfortunately is no longer with us. Going to the Isle of Wight Festival, courtesy of John and Caroline Giddings, and then going and standing backstage while Maxi was performing and watching him from the side. That was, when you know somebody, because Maxi was a very good friend, and then you actually see them performing, it's kind of quite special. Same as George Harrison. I mean, that was the other person who I was lucky enough to know quite well, and to see him perform was fantastic.
David, just on that, while we're on that, just a little note, and it shouldn't go unnoticed. I know maybe they're all Irish, and I don't know why, but Dolores O'Riordan from the Cranberries some years ago, she died, and more recently was Sinead O'Connor. But Sinead O'Connor did a wonderful, wonderful tune and a song with Shane McGowan of the Pogues, who passed last week. And I think it's one of the most unbelievable, moving ceremonies to have all of Irish television and a lot worldwide to see an hour and a half of the music and the joy and people dancing around the coffin. It could only happen in Ireland. It could only happen at something like the Pogues would put together. But, that's the power of the music. And that's why I love it so much, because in Ireland, music is such an important part of life.
Yeah, well, look, I think that while we're on that very subject, both of you, as I know well, are people that celebrate life and really enjoy and embrace the moments while we're here. Both of you have had let's be frank, you both had near-death experiences. Adrian, you had a cycling accident, which resulted in you having some metalwork placed in your skull. Eddie, I've tried to hold the pillow over your head several times, and you can discuss the
not as many times as Marie.
Poor Marie.
Yeah, indeed, Marie, his wife.
She's doing it on a daily basis.
So let me just be on that. It could be seen as slightly morbid, but Eddie, as you've teed up the celebration that life is, and only the Irish in that way were able to do that recently. You gentlemen, when you were both faced with your very challenging moments over the last several years, share with us where you were in your mind and what was the drive and just your appreciation coming out the other side of it. So I don't mind which one of you goes first, as long as it's Adrian.
Well, I mean,
you're showing favouritism here, DC.
Yeah, that cycling accident. I mean, it's all accidents are stupid, but that's a particularly silly one. But I think what came out of that was actually how important people around you are. So I ended up with a fractured skull, and luckily we had been with Mandy, my wife, and I had been with Bernie and Fabi Eccleston for the previous couple of days, so I was not in a terribly good state. Bernie kind of Mandy rang Bernie and said, "Look, this is not looking good. He's looking a bit grey. You need to get him admitted." So Bernie offered to put his boat on. He then his ex is Croatian. We were in Croatia, so he then rang his ex, who ran the Prime Minister, who ran the head of neurosurgery, who is on holiday in Bosnia or something. But wheels moved to get me admitted very quickly. I was then admitted into this Croatian hospital in the capital, Split. Well, I think it's not the capital, but anyway, Split. And round the back, if you go as a tourist to Split, then it has a real Italian Mediterranean feel. It's very glamorous. You go to the hospital, you might as well have been in Stalingrad. It was kind of 1960. It was all kind of porcelain tiles and that smell of disinfectant, and absolutely stunning nurses but they were completely brutal. And so I was admitted, and about 4:00 in the afternoon, the three wise men came round at the end of my bed, which must have been the anaesthetist, the maxillofacial guy, and the neurosurgeon, and all quite young. And one of them spoke reasonable English and said, "As you know, you've fractured your skull, and we need to operate very quickly, because otherwise you could lose the use of your eye." And I said, "Okay, well, what's involved in the in the operation?" "Oh, we cut and we place and everything will be perfect." "All right, and what's the risk of damage to the eye during the operation?" "Oh, no risk at all." "Okay, and what's the risk of brain damage in the operation?" "Oh, not much." "Oh, okay, well, give me a percentage." "Oh, 5, maybe 10%. At which point I rang Mandy and said, "Whoa,
she just rang you."
Yeah, I think she did. "And for Christ's sake, get me out of here." And then again, Bernie and Fabi and Christian and Joe Macari in particular, they all swung into action and got me home, and I was operated on back in the UK.
And
So
where
I
did
think
you land with how much brain damage did you end up with? I'm going for about 7%.
A lot.
Well,
Obviously.
there are those who say
A lot.
and there are those who can say they really can't spot the difference.
Actually, it could only have, we're all going to Croatia to get to that doctor, because based on what they did, if you see the results of what happened on the track this year, we all need to go to the same neurosurgeon, to be very honest with you. David, you included. David, you don't need to tell us about the thing, because I know you've told us on the podcast about the airline crash, and I mean, that was totally harrowing. My situation is less dramatic, but nevertheless at the time was more frightening, because when you're out in the wild Atlantic, and anyone who's ever sailed from Durban to Cape Town, It's called the Roaring Forties. I can promise you, it's wild. The reason why it's called the Roaring Forties because the wind and the tide is coming against you, and you might be only doing 1 or 2 knots because everything. It's quite strange. People don't realize, but the tide is a multiple times stronger than any wind. So therefore, you have to pay a lot of attention to the tide when you're sailing, and the waves were coming right over the top of the boat. I mean, it was just like as if you were at the bottom of a swimming pool. It was horrific. And you never, ever think that you're going to get away with it. But, when you're in a good boat and it's very solid and very well made, they will always survive. And we were in an Oyster 885, and I know that Adrian is about to take one as well, because we're sailors, and that's another common denomination here. Which hopefully I'd like to see Adrian going around the world. But that's my little experience.
I wasn't a sailor until you talked me into it. But
no, I did talk him into it because I said, Adrian, come and have a few. Then Corsica, Sardinia, and we did a lot of good holidays 10, 12 years ago. And suddenly, it's an unbelievable way. And we talked about this in the past. The pressure, particularly on somebody like the drivers, like you, DC, like me in a smaller way, but Christian or any like Max, I can see why a boat is so important, because once they're on the boat, they can turn the phone off and they're free of all that hysteria and excitement. And so that's one thing that boating does do. It gives you a complete sense of freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But EJ, what that confirms is, I was just going to say, what that confirms is when you're doing that big sail and it was, like being at the bottom of the swimming pool, it confirms to me you're like a cockroach. You just won't die.
I'll have to think up a suitable word for you, DC, because I have some pictures. Of things that you commissioned, and I just hope that we can put it up on the website, because I'm not sure if you can remember, but I'm going to put it up in a few minutes. But you commissioned a painting of when, with your kilt on, when he won his 200th Grand Prix, and you are flashing your willy. I mean, David, have you no sense of style, for Christ's sake?
I'm not sure willy is the appropriate word. It doesn't do justice to the grandeur of what it represents.
I tell you what,
we've had painted.
I've seen the size of this drawing. I think you have a very good imagination of the size of yourself.
Yeah. I think you told the artist a few porkies, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, look, it's a bit little. It's like EJ always stands slightly forward in any photograph, so he looks taller than he actually is.
That's true. David, I hope this camera can see this, because we want to know what gave you the license to grow that to the size that it is. I mean, come on, please behave.
Well,
I'm a Scotsman. What can I say?
You haven't got your kilt on.
Do the previous picture.
Yeah, that's the picture before.
Lift the kilt. Yeah, lift the kilt.
Yeah.
Sorry,
EJ does everything in reverse.
You don't have to close your eyes for this one, but that is DC with a kilt on and celebrating the 200th Grand Prix win. I might tell you that he's actually, after this year, he's added a lot more to it. So, anyone who wins those kind of Grand Prix is wild. I'm in the single digits, and I know you're double digits, DC. But, it's hard to describe. When he's brown bread in a box and gone underground, we'll all say, how did he do that? Because none of us knows.
No, it's incredible. But I just want to know, Eddie, how do you feel, EJ, to be the least successful of the 3 people in the podcast here? Not in financial terms.
You might ask that. I have an equally good question, DC, but I think I'm glad you brought that up, because you're trying to humiliate me. But I might remind you that this man here...
I'm not trying. I want to.
Well, you're doing a poor job of it. He was in McLaren. He then was in Williams. And then he was in Red Bull. And funny enough, you're exactly the same 3 people. But he won 215 Grand Prix. You won 13. And as sure as hell, you never came really that close to winning a world championship. And he's won 25 of them, for Christ's sake. What happened to you along the way?
Okay, let me ask you this. If you're not first in the championship, what's the closest you can be to winning it?
You're the first of the losers. That's what you were.
The answer you're looking for is second. I finished second in the World Championship to Michael Schumacher. I didn't win Grand Prix when everyone else crashed out like you did.
Oh, yes, we did. Oh, yes, we did. Listen,
Which one did you win?
Which ones did I win on? Actually, Ron Dennis came to me, your friend and his friend. We're going to talk about Ron in a second, because he said to me at the race in Monza, when we were on the front row with Mika, and we kind of hounded, but then we had the Honda engine, which was magic. And that's why I think Aston Martin will be strong in the future. But we did win there, and Ron came up to me on the podium and he said, Jesus, at least you can say you won one race on merit, because after that, it was the weirdest compliment I've ever had from him.
That's normal, Ron. There's always a sting in the tail.
Do we want a little Ron Dennis story here? A little Ron Dennis story.
Yes.
So, Adrian, actually, it should be known that when Adrian left Williams, he single-handedly screwed them, because they've won absolutely nothing since he left. So he went to McLaren, and he decided with Ron as a kind of a special character, as we all know. And so everything has to be either silver, grey or black. So Adrian decided, as the chief engineer and aerodynamicist there, decided to paint his office duck egg blue. Whereupon Ron came into the office and he absolutely lost it. He completely, let Adrian tell you how he lost it. Come on.
So I'd only been there for about 2 weeks, but I was working crazy hours trying to get the design for the 98 car ready. And the office I inherited was John Barnard's old office, and it was kind of, it was just great. It was floor-to-ceiling mahogany panels. It was a dark mahogany table. It was a black chair. It was really dark brown, dingy carpets. It was just depressing. And so by the time, when I was working till about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, by then you kind of felt like you're looking around for the rope and the belt or whatever. So as we were leaving for Hungary, I went to the Hungary race. So to the factory manager, can you brighten it up a bit over the weekend? And I gave him a duck egg blue paint chart, and so put a tan carpet in and change the chair for something a bit lighter, and so on and so forth. And he got that all done over the weekend. Came back on Monday, and it was kind of, my office looked out onto the DO, and so it's like one of those weird postcards where it started out as black and white, and then somebody's coloured bits of it in. So my office is now the coloured bit, and the sort of frame out into the DO was still black and white. Anyway, that evening, Ron came in about 6 o'clock, see how it was going on. And as he came into the door frame, looked up, I had hi, Ron, and he started, he didn't say a word. He started, gulping like a fish, like a goldfish. And as he gulped, he went redder and redder until he went purple. And I thought, Christ, he's going to have a heart attack here and now. And eventually, still not a single word, gulping, he spun on his heels and walked out. And never said another word. But I think for him, it was two-sided. First of all, that his factory now had a bit of colour in it. And secondly, it all happened without him knowing. And he's a bit of a control freak, which is fair enough. It's probably a motor racing you need to be. But it turned out years later, I found out from Lisa, his wife, that he came back that evening and said, "That's it. Get rid of him. I'm going to fire him in the morning." And she talked him down a bit. So yeah, he wasn't happy.
Well, just as well he didn't. The 98 car turned out to be a dominant car. I'll tell you one abbreviated Ron Dennis story before EJ should tell us one. And of course, we've all got the utmost respect for Ron and his achievements. And, that goes without saying. But my end of 95, Mika's lying in hospital in Adelaide, having had a tyre failure and a very big accident. I go to dinner with Ron and Lisa, and I'm on my own. And I'm sort of drowning my sorrows because I've crashed out of leading the Grand Prix, having hit the pit wall. And that
again,
you always blame that on the software.
Yeah, again,
it was.
He won every race.
Let me finish the story.
He won every race.
Hold on.
None of it was ever his fault.
So. Never. So I'm sitting there at dinner, and Ron's obviously very distracted, and Lisa as well. They're worried for the driver, but I'm signed to drive for the team for 96. So we're doing a sort of end of one season, beginning of a new start dinner together. And a friend of mine, a friend of Oliver's, whose name will remain anonymous for the purpose of this story, but let's just say he's a good Irishman who likes to ride bikes and build bikes, had shown me this trick called the flying napkin trick. Now, I won't go into the details of how you make the napkin fly, otherwise this will get edited out of the show. But during the dinner, I decide I'm going to do the flying napkin trick. So I stand up from the table and I say to Ron and Lisa, do you know where the toilets are? To which, of course, they look at the napkin flying and they point over to the corner, and I go to the bathroom, and suddenly I sober up and think, what have I just done? You know, I have done the flying napkin trick in front of my new boss and his wife. And anyway, sort of pat myself down with water, go back to the table, and they're both laughing hysterically. And that may well explain what could have had me fired, like Adrian for painting his office without permission, could have had me fired before I even started. But I stayed at McLaren for 9 seasons thereafter. So those who are listening who know how you make a napkin fly will understand this story and how I did it. Those who don't, well, look, there you go, kids. Some things you just don't need to know.
Well, you've got us all in suspense now, because sooner or later you're going to have to do a podcast of your own, DC. How to make napkins fly. I wouldn't, but actually you've got a lot of other tricks up your sleeve.
I have witnessed DC doing the flying napkins.
Have you seen it?
Yeah, and
I've seen DC.
It's impressive.
Something that,
Anyway, I'm going to tell you my Ron Dennis story. And it was before Formula One, so it must have been late 80s. And I was doing quite well. We'd won a couple of championships with Johnny Herbert and then with Jean Alessi, and things were going really well. And I was planning Formula One. And Ron was super nice to me, super nice. And in fact, he always has been nice, but sometimes he lectures me, and probably rightly so. But anyway, Lisa himself came up one Sunday morning, no Grand Prix. Don't ask me why, but Marie and I, for whatever reason, I'm not sure how many kids we had at that stage, probably were trying to make one, but anyway, that's another story. But anyway, he arrived on a Sunday morning, and typical Ron, he knows how to wheedle himself, and the next thing he comes, yay, into the bedroom. So eventually we get dressed and we go down and we have a breakfast, and we decide to go just right behind our house was the Cherwell River. It was the Cherwell boathouse, so we took a couple of punts. And I had him in the punt, and we were punting down the stream. And I decided, I'm going to have a bit of fun, because he takes the mickey out of me all the time. So anyone who's ever on a punt is a big long stick, which makes it goes to the bottom of the river. And so I got it up and I took it out of the water, and I could see Ron at the very back of it, and I gave him a whack. And the next thing, straight in the water. Jesus, he had a sense of humor failure for quite a while, but eventually he wised up to it. He's never ever forgotten it, how I absolutely nearly drowned him in the Cherwell River. So that's my story with Ron.
I remember him cutting your earpieces when you worked for the BBC. So we were live at Silverstone, and I couldn't understand, like, you're always a bit mad when you're doing television, but suddenly you weren't listening to what we were all saying or listening to the director. And it was because because Ron had come up behind you, Eddie, and cut the cable to your earpieces. And therefore you were just completely oblivious to what was happening in the show.
Well, not alone that. I was so upset. But there was a guy, BBC, were furious, absolutely wild, because it never happened to them in all of the broadcasts that someone of an opposing team could come with a knife and cut the wires direct. And they said, it's a criminal act. We are the government, and it's a crime against the government. So they wrote Ron a letter. He had to apologize to them, because they were a state-funded and a state-owned body, and he had interfered with state-owned property. So it kind of backfired on him, but it didn't. But he got away with it, of course. But it just shows you what can happen. The power of BBC. You don't mess with them, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So, Adrian, just moving things along a little bit, I'm curious to know, what do you do for hobbies? I know you go cycling. I know you're keen on your sailing. I know you love your music. But what I mean is, what is it that sort of is a burbling below the surface passion that when you eventually decide that you no longer are inspired by Formula One, are you suddenly going to become like? Are we going to find out you're a landscape artist and you're going to be displaying like Churchill used to, or you're a naturalist and you're going to suddenly live naked in some sort of hippie commune? What is it that Adrian does that none of us know?
Well, the latter's an interesting option. I hadn't thought of that one, but I'll give it
some
consideration. I mean, crikey, I'm lucky enough to do what I've been passionate about. I love design. That's kind of, design engineering and competitive design engineering, I think is a really for me, I find it a really fascinating combination. America's Cup sailing, outside of motorsport in the biggest sense of the word, so including MotoGP and so rally, whatever. Then where else is there big bucks engineering competition, so man and machine? And the answer is of course America's Cup. So, and it's a real parallel industry. So that kind of is what sparked my interest in sailing. And then along with EJ, as he said, kindly inviting me on his boat and so forth. And that's rapidly coming up as something which I love, just the tranquility of being out at sea, lots of time and so forth. Other things, I mean, as I said, we go cycling when you're down here. The horse racing side is something which Eddie has a horse. He actually won a race somehow or other.
Marie won the race, you tell you. I had nothing to do with it.
All right.
Last Saturday, big celebrations in the Jordan house.
Right. So so anyway, he's into the horses, and I tag along. I mean, I live in Ascot, so it's kind of be something wrong if we didn't have an interest in horse racing.
DC has never been at a horse race. He ought to change that this year. Can you bring him to Ascot with you?
Of course, absolutely. Just bring
I'd love
a few
to.
pounds and a flutter, and it's good fun. It's good fun. Actually, the one that's really nice is the Windsor Night races. We need to get used to those.
Yeah. And Goodwood.
Yeah. And
Goodwood.
I'd love to do that.
So I have a couple of really quick fire questions that DC you can help me with, because I'd like to maybe explain things like Multi-21. Do you remember the Multi-21 with Christian Horner? I want to know what happened with Vettel and why did he not accept your agreement to move over? David, you better explain to the people just in case, because you know what happened. It was Mark Webber, it was Vettel, it was Red Bull, but you'd already left Red Bull at that stage. Tell them what it was, swapping like what Michael Schumacher used to do, except it was done with the team organising it rather than the driver organising it.
Yeah, well, look, in summary, Multi-21, it was a code to say that car number 2, which was Mark at that time, would stay in front of car number 1, which was Seb, as he was the world champion. So it was an instruction to hold position to the end of the Grand Prix. And Seb didn't do that. He overtook Mark. And that's where there was a bit of a fallout there. But Adrian can explain from being in the hot seat. And Adrian, you've been there over the years with many situations where drivers are falling out, and it's part of the fun, isn't it, of Formula One when you've got those, really motivated individuals looking to win the Grand Prix and fighting with their teammates. But that particular one, Seb was just a little terrier, wasn't he?
He was. I mean, I can't remember, but the exact details. But Seb ended up behind Mark for some reason, and he felt that wasn't fair, and therefore he had the pace, and so he just went ahead and overtook him. And of course, Mark was then felt that he'd been holding back a bit, because he was expecting team orders to follow. So as you say, there's then the usual fallout, and that kind of created a bit of friction between the two drivers for a while. But they're both great people. They're both friends to this day. I think you know better than I that when you're in the cockpit, the red mist comes down, the competitive instinct kicks in, and sometimes getting a driver who's in that position to then adhere to team orders, that's not necessarily what you're thinking about. I mean, you're a complete gent, obviously, with Mika with Melbourne in '98, where the agreement there was, I think Mika was on pole, David was second, but you were typically the better starter, so we had an agreement where whoever got to the first corner first would then, all things being equal, go on and win the race, or lead the race. And I think you fancied yourself as probably getting Mika off the line.
Never.
So you accepted it.
Never.
And in the event you didn't, so the cars are running 1-2. We had this thing called brake steer, which is a really bad name because that's what ultimately got it banned. So it's like a fiddle brake on the rear that the driver could operate as a fourth pedal. And anyway, Mika was overusing it and getting the rear brake too hot, which I was really worried about. So I came on the radio and said, I can't remember, we had a code for because we didn't want people to know what we were doing. There's some code which meant basically don't use the fourth pedal as much. And Mika misheard it through his Adelaide accident. His hearing wasn't very good, particularly in one ear, and he misheard it as come in. So Mika appeared in the pit lane completely surprised. You obviously then went past, but because that was kind of not really Mika's fault, you couldn't blame his hearing. And then you honoured and let it reverse, and which, you know, you were one of the true gents in Formula One, and as it turned out, actually, had you not reversed that, he wouldn't have won the championship that year because it went down to the wire.
So actually, I have to come in there, DC, unless you've got something to add to that, because, you know, this fourth pedal leads me on to feel as an opposing team, that is a blatant cheat. Were you cheating?
We wouldn't cheat.
No, it's not cheating.
See, of course it was cheating. So I want to know,
No.
you had your ass burnt with those titanium things underneath your thing. Do you realise that the floor on your car was not legal because it was all flexy at the front of it? It was supposed to be rigid, and it is true. You had a flexi leading package on that car.
Yeah,
EJ, just could you talk longer?
That was allowed. There was no test. There was no test on the front stiffness of the floor.
So
exactly. And Eddie, just because you talk longer and louder doesn't make your opinion a fact. One thing that will live with me to my dying day that Adrian said to me many, many years ago is that he would read the rules as defined by the FIA not to see what they say, but to see what they don't say. And I haven't said that very smoothly, so I'll try again.
No,
Adrian has always told me he reads the rules to not see what they say, but to see what they don't say. And that is the areas of innovation. And then over time, the FIA may define that it has to be a certain way. But when you read between the lines, that's where you create opportunities. So, gentlemen, I think at this point, I think it's important to thank our dear listeners and to remind them that they can follow Formula for Success on Spotify or wherever they get their podcasts. And they can also find us on social media with the handle F1 for Success. Adrian, it's been an absolute privilege, as always, to have you on the show. I'm really sorry that you're locked in a room there with Eddie Jordan. Protect yourself, be safe, and I'll see you in the new year. Adrian Newey, the most successful designer in the history of Formula One. Thank you very much for joining us on Formula for Success.
Happy Christmas.
Merry Christmas to everybody. Absolutely. Thank you.